Greetings, YouTube. The vlog I'm about to record is going to be entirely of a personal nature. This is about kind of how the internal structure of my mind has been working with the issues of my emotional involvement in the OGL, D&D 3rd Edition, and Pathfinder, with 4th Edition, and with the OSR movement. So if you were not interested in the internal workings of my head, or how they relate to gaming, and my emotional entanglement with these different rule systems, this video is probably not for you. I will not be hurt by that if you do not stay around. Thank you for your time. For those that are willing to listen, I need to do a little background. I actually wrote notes. I got real notes this time. Now, I believe I've mentioned this particular experiment before, but I'm going to bring it up again because it's very pertinent to this conversation. There were some researchers at once that did an experiment using chickens. Yes, chickens. And they took 3 groups of chickens, and they put the first group into a cage that had a feeding device. And the feeding device would work if the chicken pecked a lever. Chicken pecked the lever once, chicken got 1 pellet of food, 1 to 1. The second group of chickens were put into a cage that had the same feeding device, but this one was programmed so that the chickens would have to peck the switch twice. 2 pecks, 1 pellet, 2 to 1. The third group of chickens were put into a cage where a computer would randomly release pellets. How many times the chickens pecked the lever did not matter. The lever did nothing. It was a placebo. Now, they conditioned the chickens to this, however long it takes to condition a chicken. I have no idea how long that takes. And then they turned off all the machines. Now, the first group of chickens, the ones that were in the cage that had the 1-to-1 ratio, they clicked their little switch a few times, got no food, and wandered off in disgust. The second cage, the ones that had the 2-to-1 ratio, they clicked the switch twice as long as the first group. But they also wandered away in disgust, probably complained about being a Microsoft machine. The third group never stopped flicking the switch. They kept tapping that little toggle forever until they were taken out of the cage. The lack of structure, the uncertainty, had destroyed their ability to have a prediction of the present and the future. Keep that in mind. Next, I'd like to talk about parenting models. Now, this particular parenting models use a 2-axis variable: high discipline and low discipline, and high tolerance and low tolerance. Now, these 4 variables give you 3 different parenting models. The first is high discipline, low tolerance. That means a lot of structure in the child's life, but they're blocked into a tiny little box. And if they step outside that box, they get yelled at, or they get hit, or they get told they're stupid. So the kids become very conservative, very limited. They don't experiment. They don't try things out of the ordinary. They're very meek and quiet. They are terrorized. Next is low discipline, high tolerance. These are kids that lack structure, but their parents are very tolerant of their behavior, so you end up with the classic wild child. Also, very unhealthy. Both of these 2 models are unhealthy. The last model is high discipline, high tolerance. Now, these kids are given structure, but their parents also give them a lot of leeway, so long as they work within that structure. So the parents say, do your homework and your chores, and be home by, X amount of time, and on weekdays and on the weekends, you can do your personal projects and endeavors and hobbies and such, anything you want. Of course, there are other guidelines as well, so that they remain safe, but you get the idea. There's a set of rules that are reasonable, and they can live within them, but there's also a high degree of acceptance of that kid. That the kid may be doing things that the parents themselves have no interest in, but they know the kid's doing it safely because they've raised them with a healthy set of rules. And this is, of the 3 models, this is the healthiest model to have. Okay, so imagine me at age 14. I've been raised in a household with an abusive alcoholic and an enabling mother. I have survived sexual predation by 2 different people. I was given the random cage of those chickens. Chaos when my father was drunk. Constantly trying to predict what he was going to do so I could avoid being hit or told I was stupid or yelled at. But there was nothing to predict. I was looking for patterns because that's what people do, but there was no pattern to find. But you keep looking for the pattern, but there is no pattern to find. But you keep looking for the pattern, there is no pattern to find. Gives you anxiety, folks. And when he was sober, it was high discipline, low tolerance. In that little box, you stay in that little box. Then my father's out of the picture because of the divorce. And separation, then eventual divorce. And my mother didn't know how to give structure. So suddenly I was thrust into low discipline, high tolerance, chaos. None of this is healthy for a 14-year-old. Zero. And then I found gaming. And gaming presented me a world, a fictitious world, but a world that had structure. It had rules. It had real rules. And they were written down on pages. And we all looked at the same rules, and we all agreed to use those rules with minor variations for house rules. But the core is what we all agreed on. And we agreed to play in the same world because we're all in the same adventuring party, and you get the idea. Now, all my further comments from this point on, when I talk about rules, is completely 100% subjective. I do not want people to be arguing in the comment section below about my impressions of the different gaming systems. I do not care. These are my subjective opinions. They cannot be wrong. They are what I brought away from these rule systems, okay? Thank you. So, the bloom went off the rose as time went by, and I began to see the foibles in first edition and second edition. The inconsistent mechanics, the nonsensical rules, alignment languages, level caps, things like that. You can't be this class just because you're a halfling. Insanity like that. And I wanted something else. And then along came the OGL 3rd edition. And that was the something else I've been looking for. And I saw that model as the high discipline, high tolerance. Whereas I'd come to view the earlier editions as low discipline, high tolerance, chaotic. But the OGL presented me with more structure without impinging upon the creativity. I was thrilled. And eventually when Pathfinder came out, the refinements they made made me even happier. Just as I also enjoy Radiance, the entire, school under the OGL tent, if you have, or whatever. And then along came 4th edition. And I saw that, my subjective opinion, as high discipline, low tolerance. All the classes are the same. Because those limited options is more appealing to people who play video games or card games or board games. And the game stopped being what I wanted it to be. And I got very angry. Oh, I was enraged. But eventually I began to get that anger away. I began to separate myself from it, and I got to the point where I could just ignore it. I couldn't engage in those conversations. I didn't want to. But I could ignore it. And I pretty much worked through most of that before the OSR games began to rise in popularity. But then came the OSR. And the OSR made me even angrier. Particularly the phrase, ruling, not rules. That one got my blood boiling. I would clench my jaw so hard, it hurt. I was so enraged. And I couldn't figure out why. I mean, I was invested in this in a way that was really, really powerfully unhealthy. And I didn't figure out why. And again, remember, I viewed these as chaotic, the older systems. Low discipline, high tolerance. And over time, I began to realize that I was seeing this as the OSR community was saying, we need to go into the past. And then I began to dig a little deeper into it, and I realized I was interpreting this as, you, James, should go into the past. And I dug a little deeper. And I realized that I saw it as, you, James, should go into your own past. Which is a very unhealthy past. that past I mentioned when I was 14. And then I began to realize that I was seeing as that the final level, when I finally dug as deep as I could go, I realized that I felt the OSR community, the movement and everything involved, was saying to me, you deserved your past. Pardon me, sweetie. Of course, that's not what anyone was saying. The 4th edition people weren't telling me that, it was high discipline, low tolerance. That's how I interpreted it. It was just a set of rules. The OGL Pathfinder game were not telling me that it was high tolerance, high discipline, high tolerance. I interpreted it that way. It was just a set of rules. The OSR people were not telling me it was low discipline, high tolerance, and you must go into the past. It was just a set of rules, or a school of rules. Clutch, however you want to term it. They were not telling me I should suffer through what I had as a child, that I should not go back to living in an abusive household with too much structure, and then in a household with no structure, that I should be sexually preyed upon. No one was telling me that. But those were the connections my subconscious mind was making. Now I'm to the point where I know what's going on. And so I'm in the process of dividing these things up. Separating my emotional involvement, which eventually, hopefully, will fade away till it's gone. Because again, it's just a set of rules for a game. I should have no emotional involvement. None. No more than I have emotional involvement in Parcheesi, a game I don't like, or Monopoly, a game I also don't like. But I don't have a lot of emotional involvement in those things. I don't care. I just don't play them. Now I have personal, serious, legitimate critiques of the OSR games. I've touched upon that before in the past, and I may touch upon them again in the future. But my critiques are separate from my emotional involvement. They've got nothing to do with each other. I'm entitled to those legitimate critiques. They're my opinion. They're subjective. I can have them. I can't be wrong. So that's where I am right now. And the dividing and letting the emotional process die out in a healthy way, because I don't need it. It isn't helping anything. It's not helping me. It's not helping anybody else. It is just a form of self-destructive act. I don't need that crap anymore. I don't need to keep alive the past, because that past is gone. It's done. The past is a book. We can learn from it, but we can never change it. And that's one of the problems of people who come out of that kind of past that I did. We keep trying to change the book. We go over it again and again and again and again, trying to perfect it. Working through in our head, well, maybe if I'd done this a little different, or maybe if I'd done that just a little bit different, things would have turned out. It doesn't friggin' matter. You can't change it. Wasting your time and energy and effort trying to change it, as opposed to doing something in the now to make your present and your future better, is insanity. It will drive you crazy. It will push you deeper and deeper into anxiety and depression. I can attest to this. So now I understand. So now comes the fixing the problem stage. That's what I'm working on right now, and I'm having some success. I was actually able to read the phrase, ruling, not rules, yesterday, and not become angry. I still disagree with it. I still really don't like that statement. But I don't like it because it's a legitimate critique of that statement as it pertains to the OSR games. It is not because I am enraged at that statement. Simply because I don't like the philosophy behind it as far as game design goes. And again, I'm entitled to that. It's okay if I have that. I'm not hurting anybody if I have that. Myself or anybody else. So that's where I am. I've been working on this particular problem for months now. I've been bouncing ideas off my friend Greg for months now. I don't think he realized why I was bouncing those ideas off of him, but that's why I have been. Thank you, Greg. I also should like to thank Greg, because he's the guy who introduced me to role-playing games back when I was 14, and he probably literally saved my life. Because it gave me structure in a time when there was none in my life. None. There was just madness. And even if it was a fictitious world, even if it was a world filled with twisted wishes and hunting down and slaying the corporeal form of Satan and just being gamers, it was better than the chaos of my real world. And it helped me along and kept me going like a cast until eventually I didn't need it anymore. And now I finally figured out what all the different things that were going on at that time meant. So that's a good thing. So, I have rambled on for almost 16 minutes. I hope I have not bored anyone silly who's watched this. This is important to me. I have a sense of accomplishment for having achieved this. I did almost all of the work in this particular issue on my own. I did bounce some of the ideas during this process off of my therapist, Stephen, who is a wonderful help. Stephen has literally made my life immeasurably better. He has helped me save myself. I did the work, but he helped me along the way. I cannot tell you how important I feel that CBT, Cognitive Behavior Therapy, is. Go get yourself a copy of the Feeling Good Handbook. Yes, it's an absurd title. I understand that. And the author uses far too many exclamation points in the text. But it's important. And it helped me to realize that there are solutions, that you don't have to waste your time asking why, which is pointless. You can ask yourself, okay, how do I fix it? Which is a much more constructive question to ask. And with a good therapist, and it took me 4 before I found a good therapist, you can do wonders. You can do wonders. It's quite pleasant. So, I will probably be discussing the OSR at some point in the future. I will field questions at that time about my opinions about the OSR, why I don't like it, what I think is at fault. Again, I've talked about it a little bit in the past, and again, I plan on talking about it in the future. So, thank you for listening. I appreciate it. And I look forward to any constructive comments you have below, but please, do not argue with me about gaming rules in this comment thread. It is pointless. At best, I will ignore you. If you act like an ass, I will block you. So, you're giving full warning here. Just discuss the other things I've been talking about. I think I've given you enough meat to play with. So, thank you for your time. And thank you for my friend Greg.